All right, so the next thing that we want to go over is just a quick example in a version of project software. So this is an alternative to Microsoft Project. We looked at a bunch of free available both web and downloadable programs, and this was sort of the best option we were able to find. So, the reason we had to do this is one, not everybody has Office, and even then, Microsoft Project is not part of the usual standard Office suite. So you would have to basically pay extra if you wanted access to it. And there's a whole lot of different versions that vary widely in quality and capability. And we just wanted to give you guys an example. So the best, like I said, the best we were able to find is this basically open source version of Microsoft Project called Project Libre. And so you go to their website and you'll find a download link for, Mac, Linux, or Windows. That'll send you to a SourceForge repository, which is just, it's just like GitHub. It's a repository where people upload their own programs. So that's not anything weird that you should necessarily be concerned about. So basically, once you download and run the installer, the first thing that you want to do is create a new project. So when you open up the LibreProject program, you'll get a dialog box that looks like this, basically asking, do you want to create a new project or open an existing project? So for this example, obviously, and we're going to be starting with a new project. So we'll just click Create Project. And then the next window you'll get looks like this. And then it's basically just the basic information for your project. It's a dialog box where you give them the name to your project, and then, who is the person in charge of your project. And then the one actual consequential choice you have here is selecting the start date or the finish date. So you'll see on the right there is a checkbox that says forward scheduled. And what that means is you're scheduling from a start date going forward. If you uncheck that, you can actually put in a desired completion date and schedule backwards from the completion date. But for simplicity's sake, and we recommend at least going with this forward scheduled. That's sort of the standard way to do a project. So the first thing that we probably want to do is set a realistic working schedule before we put in any tasks. So by default, it assumes that basically everyone is working a standard work week, which is 8 hours, Monday through Friday, 40 hours a week. So obviously your students, you're working extra hours on top of your courses. So we want to basically put in a more realistic working schedule. So that way, when we add tasks that take a fixed amount of time, it will take a realistic number of days to execute these tasks. So what you want to do is hit the calendar button, which is in that little projects section under the file tab. And when you do that, you will get a window that looks like this. So you could specify specific working hours, like, oh, this person's able to work from 3 to 5, or this person can work from 2 to 4. But that's probably a little bit more complicated that we need to do right now. And so all we want to do is say, for example, assume that everyone is going to be working 20 hours a week. And I just selected that because that's the maximum amount of time student workers at LSU are allowed to work. So that was just sort of an estimate of how much time you could put in. But you could easily change this to 10 hours, or the appropriate thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up so that everyone is working 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. So once I have this window here, I'm going to select the standard calendar from that little drop down. And then I will shift click on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And that's going to select all of those days throughout the calendar. Next, I want to click that little non-default working time. And what you'll see in there is originally it'll say from 8 to 12, and then from 1 to 5 p.m. or 1300 to 1700. So what I'm going to do is just delete the 1300 and 1700. So that way it's going to say that everyone's only going to work 4 hours a day. It's actually going to schedule that for the morning, but I don't really care about the specific hours for this example. It's more, I want to reduce the amount of time that people are working so I get a more realistic example of how long the project's going to take. So after you do that, you should hit OK. But one thing I have noticed with this particular software is that sometimes it doesn't seem to register. So I'll reopen the calendar and it will be back to the default. So I would just double check afterwards. All right, so resuming, the next thing that we want to actually do is start adding those specific tasks and that work breakdown structure that we talked about. So the way in general to do this is you work your way down. So first thing we're going to do is enter the major tasks, which are the like 1.0, 2.0 from that work breakdown structure outline. So the way to do that is you just enter the name of the task in the name box. And each one of these rows represents a specific task. Now you can see there is a duration and a start and finish time there, but we don't need to worry about those yet because we're going to add the subtasks below this, and then those durations and start and finish dates are going to be automatically calculated by the program. So once we've got all our major tasks entered, so you can see here I've got my power system, my flight control unit, data archive disk, transmitter, mechanical structure, thermal control, and management tasks, right? This is basically using the same examples as from the WBS from the earlier lecture. So then what I want to do is underneath each of these, insert the appropriate number of rows for the next level down. So if you look under that task section on the task tab, there's a little plus symbol with the word insert next to it. And what that's going to do is it's going to insert a new row above the row that you currently have selected. So if I want to put stuff underneath the power system, I want to be on basically where the flight control unit is, and then hit plus to add the appropriate number of rows. If I add too many, I can just delete one by using the delete key. And as you might expect, you can also right click and select menu options, but I am not sure what the keyboard shortcuts are for this. I do know that the delete button does not seem to delete a row like it does in Microsoft Project, if you're familiar with that. So once I've got the right number of rows added, I will then, basically add the next level down. So I'll go in and I'll put under power system, power source, FCU supply, DAU, hard drive supply, all of those subunits. The next, when you originally enter them, they're going to be basically at the same rank level as the original task. They're going to be at the same level as power system. So what you want to do is select all of the appropriate ones, and then if you look next to the insert and delete buttons, there's an indent and outdent button. So if you click those will be indented below whatever the unit is that is immediately above them. So you can see that I've selected all of the power system subunits and I've indented them. And now there's a little minus sign next to power system. So, and power system is in bold. So I could in fact click that minus sign and it would collapse all of those subunits below there and hide them. And that minus would change to a plus that I could then expand out. Also, if you look to the right of the tasks, you'll see that basically the bar on the right there on what's called the Gantt chart, which is basically your timeline, has changed to a little bar, a black bar, whereas all of the individual tasks are little red bars. So what that is going to do is that power system with the arrow, downward pointing arrows, is going to span the entire duration of all of the stuff, all of its subunits. So I'm basically going to go through this entire process over and over again, going down a level each time until I get all of the items that I had on my WBS entered in. So you can see here that I have all of the subunits under power system, and on one of those is CubeSat supply. And then under CubeSat supply, I have 4 different subunits. So interface to power source, FCU control interface, DC-DC converters, and FCU monitoring interface. Those are all underneath CubeSat supply. And then under the FCU control interface, I then further have 5 units, the establish control requirements, design a control interface, prototype and test design, complete design, and implement and test design. So those last 5 units, those are the bottom level. Those are your specific tasks, right? So if you can see here, I basically have 1, 2, 3, 4 different levels. So starting at power system, that's the first level. CubeSat is the second level. FCU control interface is the third level. And then all of the things under FCU control interface are my 4th level. So once I've completed all of that, I want to then basically be able to have the WBS code. So that's like the 1.1, 1.1.1 code that you would use from your WBS. I want to be able to show that on my task list here. So the way you do that is you can add a column. So if I right click on any one of the columns here, so like name, duration, start, finish, you'll get a little pop-up window that says insert column. It will then give you a drop down with a whole big list of all the possible columns, one of which, if you scroll down, will be WBS. And if I do that, it will add a WBS column. Unfortunately, it will not automatically fill in the numbers for you. So you'll have to actually enter in those manually, but this also helps you basically see what level each individual task is at. So my top level tasks are my 1, and so flight control unit would be 2, data archive unit would be 3, etc. So then, next level down, I'll add a decimal and then start numbering them with 1. And I'll do that until I have all the way down to my 4th level. So if you look at where it says establish control requirements, I have 4 numbers separated by decimal points, indicating that this is 4 levels down in my WBS. So if you look to the right here, you'll basically see that any time where I have a bunch of stuff that are have subunits within them, there'll be those black bars with the points on the ends indicating that there's subtasks beneath it, where items that are merely tasks that take at my lowest level, they will be these red rectangles. So the next thing that I want to do is actually set realistic durations. So if you remember, we didn't worry about the start and finish or durations. So it just defaults to this 1 day question mark. So it just assumes that, hey, it might take a day. The question mark is what just indicates that it's an estimate. And that's just the default value that it's going to put in for all of these tasks. So the next thing that I want to do is go in and enter in the duration for each one of these tasks that I have come up with from your time estimates with the WBS. So you can either enter in a duration in days, but you can also enter in hours. And you can see that basically each one of your subunits right now is going to take the length of the longest task because we haven't set any precedent. So it's assuming that you can work all of these in parallel. So the only thing limiting the time, for example, to finish the FCU control interface is I have to finish the longest task, which is the prototype and test, which in this case is 4 days. And if you look, it's going to roll that up so that if I look at the power system, the duration is 10 days, and that's based upon whatever the longest task is below it. But you should realize that, well, actually I have to do some of these tasks sequentially. For example, I can't prototype and test a design until I have created that design. Oh, sorry. One other additional thing about the actual durations. So like I said, you can specify it in days, but you can also specify it in, oh, well, I think this is going to take 3 hours of working time. And you can also use decimal durations of days and hours. So you can either set it in that duration field, or you can double click on the task and you'll get this task information pop up. And it'll tell you, the name, and notably there's 2 fields here, the duration and work. So the duration will always be displayed in days, and the work will always be displayed in hours. But for example, you can see here that the work is 8 hours, and because I set the working time earlier to be 4 hours a day, it will automatically change that to 2 days. But one thing to note is basically those 2 fields are linked. So if I was, for example, to change duration to 3 days, it would change the work to 12 hours and vice versa. So the next thing that you want to do is basically enter the task dependence. So one of the fields that will already be displayed, and you might have to drag over the task window to resize it. you'll see there's a predecessors field. So if I enter a number in that predecessors field, and that number should be the row number from the far left of the task that I have to complete before starting this task. So you can see under task number 15, which is design control interface, I've put task number 14, which is establish control requirements. And what that means is I cannot start on that task until I've finished the previous one. And if you look at the chart over there, it will now reschedule these, and it'll have a little arrow from each task to the next, where each one is a predecessor to the next one. You can also have multiple predecessors to a single task. So for example, I could have had something within one of the, under like DC to DC converters that I would need to complete before completing my design for the FCU control interface. And the way you do that is you would just do a comma and then the additional number. The key thing here is you have to use the row numbers on the left. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, just that is created automatically when you enter in a task, and not the WBS number, the 1.1 or whatever it is. So one thing that you'll note once you do that, it's going to automatically stretch out the time, and now you can see that the FCU control interface is going to take 10 days. And because I've set up all the tasks below it having to be completed sequentially, well, it's just the 1 day plus 2 day plus 4 days plus 1 day plus 2 days, right? So it's just adding them up. So one thing that's a little awkward about this particular software is you don't have very good control of zooming in and out of your timeline here. So you can see here that I'm zoomed in pretty far. So you can see it's marked off in 4-hour increments, which means I can probably only see 1 or 2 weeks. And since this is a project that's going to last several months, I'm going to want to be able to zoom out. So the way you do that is there's simply a zoom in and zoom out button under this, next to the Gantt chart view under this task tab. Unfortunately, those zooms are pretty big jumps, but unfortunately, that's the way it is for this particular free version of software. Another limitation with this particular software is it does not have an export. There is a export to PDF, but that basically just prints it out as a series of sheets. So as far as I could tell, the best way to get if you wanted an image of the Gantt chart is to just resize the task window and the Gantt chart window here, and then take a screenshot and crop it, or use something like a screen capturing like Snip and Sketch in Windows. I'm sure Mac also has a similar thing. But this is just sort of the basics of how you create a schedule. The idea being that if you put in all of the precedents and the times for the lowest level tasks, you'll generate a timeline of all of your individual tasks that have to be completed and give you an idea of how much time you need. And that is it for the example of the project software.